This message was never intended to be uncovered, especially not by those unprepared for its truth. And yet, if you're listening now, the veil has begun to lift. The document is dated March 1983, signed by Dr. Lawrence Arkwood, once a researcher at the enigmatic Princeton Consciousness Laboratory. 30 days after penning these words, Arkwood disappeared. No leads, no body, no explanation. Officially, cardiac arrest. Unofficially, he crossed a threshold meant to stay sealed. His letter was hidden inside an old, time-worn edition of the Divine Comedy, wedged precisely at the chapter describing the ninth circle of hell. This is no mere confession, it is a transmission. A report on an experiment so secret, it was erased from every known record. Its name, Project 47, code name Gateway. Its purpose to document neural activity not only during clinical death, but moments after the body had ceased. Arkwood led the operation, a skeptic, a rationalist, a man of data, until he saw what lay beyond silence. That day, the line between science and soul dissolved. Initiation, the 0 hour 0 seconds, cardiac arrest. Breath ceases, clinical death declared. The heart monitor goes flat, and yet, the EEG whispers on. For 5 seconds, utter stillness. Then, at the 6th second, a rupture, a sudden surge in the temporal lobe, the seat of sensory experience, emotional memory, and inner vision. This wasn't the flicker of a dying brain. It was ignition. By the 13th second, synchronized waves began to rise within the frontal cortex, the center of identity, memory, time perception, and logical flow. These weren't chaotic bursts. They resembled conscious architecture, similar to neural patterns seen during transcendental states or revelation. Later, upon revival, the subject described what he felt. At first, a low hum, not from outside, but inside. Not mechanical, but alive. Then came the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of interference, as if something stepped aside. So I could finally hear what was always there. The report indicated that during this phase, the brain exhibited faint, ordered pulses, previously recorded only during REM dreaming. But this wasn't dreaming. The body was clinically lifeless, and still, something within was moving forward, not extinguishing, evolving, not a final page, but a doorway opening, 62 seconds after clinical death. By all accepted medical definitions, brain activity should be absent. Yet the EEG tells another story. Not noise, not collapse, but intricate, deliberate signals, especially from the regions tied to visual processing and spatial mapping. These weren't echoes of life. They were patterns, far denser, more vibrant than those seen in REM sleep. Intensity multiplied by factors of 10. The subject, resuscitated hours later, described it calmly. There was no weight, no breathing, no urgency. I didn't feel like I lost my body. I felt like I remembered I never truly needed it. The space was dark, but the darkness was alive. Not cold, not void. I wasn't moving through it, I was expanding into it. Each memory became a direction, and the deeper I remembered, the more space appeared around me. It wasn't discovery, it was recognition. 3 minutes and 47 seconds post-death, a sudden sharp activation in the hippocampus, the center of memory consolidation, spatial cognition, and personal chronology. Monitors recorded data surges resembling hyper-fast neural indexing, like the brain was retrieving lifetimes of information in microseconds. Dr. Arkwood noted in the margin, this wasn't recall, it was embodiment. The subject wasn't observing memories, he was inside them, fully immersed, multidimensional. Time had no direction. The patient later confirmed, it wasn't a montage. It wasn't symbolic. My entire life was happening again. But not as a sequence, as a space I was inside of. These weren't poetic metaphors. They were precise neurological phenomena. In death, the brain didn't shut down. It opened up. 6 minutes and 15 seconds post-mortem. The EEG recorded something virtually unseen in living patients. Total synchronization between the brain's hemispheres. Ordinarily, the left and right sides of the brain communicate asynchronously. Logic balancing intuition. Language distinct from imagery. But now, they moved in perfect unison. A single pattern. Unified. As though the brain had become a tuning fork for a singular, coherent signal. This kind of symmetry had only ever been witnessed in the most advanced meditation states, or during reported near-transcendent experiences. But this subject was dead. Heart silent, lungs still, pupils fixed. No outward signs of life, only inner echoes, deep electric patterns from regions that should have gone dark. And then came the account. I thought I was alone, floating, expanding. Then it shifted. Not a sound, not a light, a perception. I felt exposed, but not vulnerable. It wasn't as if something saw me. It was as if everything I ever was already known, instantly, entirely. No shame, no praise, just truth. I can't explain it well, but I wasn't being judged. I was being witnessed, completely. He paused in his recounting before adding, there was no form, no gender, no shape, just the unmistakable sense. You are known, and you are not alone. Dr. Arkwood referred to this as the observer phenomenon, borrowing terminology from quantum mechanics and spiritual literature alike. But this time, it wasn't theory. It was happening. The subject's awareness, he wrote, engaged with a presence that cannot be explained by biological means. This was not imagination. This was not memory. It was contact. With something above the architecture of self, in a section underlined twice. If the brain is clinically non-functional, what received this encounter? And through what medium did it take place? By this point, Arkwood had discarded traditional neurology. His final margin note reads, what we call the conscience may be a dim reflection of something far greater. And only in death does one meet the truth of themselves, fully, silently, irreversibly. At 9 minutes and 3 seconds, the brain had already flatlined, death by every standard. But just before total silence, a final wave surged. It lasted less than a second, 0.7 seconds, but within that flash, neural activity spiked to levels seen only in states of full alertness and deep focus. Researchers called it the clarity spike. The revived patient later said time stopped, not slowed, but ceased to exist entirely. Thoughts, sensations, and emotions no longer followed one another. They occurred all at once. Then everything dissolved. He found himself outside of time and form, not in light or darkness, but in pure awareness. It didn't feel unfamiliar. He didn't know his name, but he understood exactly what he was. And wherever he was, it felt like home. Dr. Arkwood reviewed the data and noted that this was not random firing, not a dream, not hallucination. The brain, though clinically dead, showed a structured pattern unlike anything previously recorded. It wasn't a shutdown, it was a transition, from thought to perception itself. The final line of the report stated plainly, if this isn't survival, it is, at the very least, a signpost, not a vanishing, but an arrival. 10 minutes after clinical death, total silence. The equipment recorded nothing. No electrical impulses, no neural waves. The brain was entirely still. According to all scientific standards, this was full and final death. Yet the patient insisted that this moment was not the end, but the beginning. He described it not as fading out, but as something closer to birth, only not into a body, but into a wider, more expansive state. He felt himself dissolve, not into nothingness, but into everything. The self he once knew, his fears, identity, attachments, felt like a costume he had taken off. What remained was no longer a person within the world, but a field of awareness without boundaries, without time, without separation. Despite his background in material science, Dr. Arkwood described this final stage using the word spirituality, not in a religious sense, but as a term to express an unmeasurable state of being. He noted that what the patient experienced could not be reduced to chemical reactions or residual brain function. It wasn't metaphor or dream. It was an encounter with a state of existence beyond structure or language. In his final notes, Arkwood wrote that if consciousness truly transitions instead of ceasing, then death is not a wall, but a doorway. The fear we attach to it may come not from what it is, but from how limited our instruments and paradigms have been. He concluded that science and spirituality are not opposing forces, but two lenses describing the same underlying truth. And perhaps, in the silence of death, they finally say the same thing. After the experiment, all materials were classified. Participants were silenced. Several researchers were reassigned. The data confiscated. Officially, Project Gateway never existed. Names were erased from records. Dr. Lawrence Arkwood's biography was altered. Public databases list him as deceased due to cardiac arrest. But colleagues insisted he showed no signs of illness. 1 month after submitting his final report, he vanished. No body, no explanation. Years later, a letter surfaced, hidden in the lining of an old book. Perhaps it was his way of preserving the truth. The church dismissed it as heresy. Academia labeled it a hoax. Yet more and more independent studies on near-death experiences began reporting the same pattern. Separation from the body, loss of time, encounters with a presence, and a deep inner certainty that consciousness does not end at death. In his notes, Arkwood wrote that consciousness is not something generated by the brain. It flows through it, like radio waves through a receiver. And if the receiver breaks, the signal doesn't vanish. It continues, simply beyond our instruments. If this is true, it rewrites everything we think we know about life, death, and what might lie beyond. We live avoiding death, trained to see it as emptiness, as the final silence. But what if we were wrong? What if death isn't an end, but a threshold, a return, not an erasure? Dr. Arkwood wrote that we fear death not because we understand it, but because we've misunderstood life. We confuse the passing identity, our name, our body, our memories, with the one who quietly observes from within. But the true self isn't the story. It's the awareness behind it. And awareness doesn't die. It transitions. It awakens. So maybe the real question isn't what happens after death, but whether we ever truly lived before it. If consciousness continues, if something lies beyond the veil, then perhaps what matters most is who we choose to become while we're here. Not what we leave behind, but what we carry forward. Maybe death isn't the great unknown. Maybe the real loss is forgetting who we are. And maybe, just maybe, after the last breath, we don't disappear. We remember. We wake up. If you've read this far, maybe something in you already knows. There's more than formulas, more than dogmas, more than what fits neatly on a lab report or in a sermon. Truth isn't always loud. It lingers in silence, between heartbeats, between dimensions. This isn't just a story about death. It's a mirror held up to life. A chance to ask, who am I really? And what, if anything, truly ends? If that stirs something in you, hit like. Not for the algorithm, but as a quiet yes. I feel it too. Subscribe if you're ready for more, because we're not done asking the questions most are afraid to voice. And now, share your answer in the comments. Do you believe consciousness continues after death? And if it does, what would you carry across? A moment? A face? Or just the knowing that you lived awake? Sometimes one question shifts everything, and sometimes one video reminds you, you are far more than what you've been told, and perhaps you always were.